Back in November, the Port St. Lucie City Council was presented with a plan to consider purchasing 3,100 acres of largely undeveloped agricultural land. That's about 5 square miles, and the plan for the land was to use it as a cyclic water storage and recovery site that will help meet the city's water demands for decades to come. Well, the council liked the idea, and the city purchased the land known as McCarty Ranch. Let's take a look at that November discussion to learn more about the property and the plan.
In 1746, in the Poor Richard's Almanac, Benjamin Franklin stated, "When the well's dry, we know the worth of water." And we're going to be addressing that, as Jesus mentioned. It's a position we don't want to ever be in. So tonight, we'll be presenting a water supply for the future of Port St. Lucie and the service area. An article in the Wall Street Journal indicated that faced with climate change and population growth, more cities are working to ensure that their well does not go dry. And instead of planning urban development as if water were abundant and considering it only as an afterthought, leaders, and I repeat, leaders, are beginning to recognize the link between their city's growth and water management. Port St. Lucie and the surrounding unincorporated areas certainly learned about the link between growth and water management on the very day that Jesus referenced. The utility was under the county's management at the time. There had been inadequate system maintenance. Big thing here is there had been a failure to expand the well field. And without a vision for the city's future, the system reached a breaking point. Here we see a headline from Tuesday, May 5th, 1992. Water cut off for 10,000 in Port St. Lucie. In the days leading up to that headline, it was a warm, hot, actually, dry spring. And on Sunday, May 3rd, due to record-breaking demands, the storage tanks, which at the time could only store 2.4 million gallons of water, had been depleted. And the wells, the few wells that they had, could not recharge or refill those tanks in quickly enough to meet the demands. By Monday, they still had not been refilled. Jesus referenced the hospital. It must maintain a certain pressure in order to do surgeries and in order to meet other patient needs. The only way the utility had to do that was to shut off the water for those 10,000 residents. In addition, another 40,000 residents had their water pressure reduced. Now, what did that mean to the community as a whole? 9 public schools had to be closed. At Club Med Resort, the biggest hotel in the area at the time, the toilets wouldn't flush. And grocery stores and restaurants had to close. They couldn't cook, they couldn't do dishes, they lost business. And from that catastrophe, a utility was reborn. A dialogue opened with the county regarding the possible transfer of the utility to the city. The transfer agreement took several months, and it was finally negotiated, and sure enough, on September 30th, 1994, the Port St. Lucie Utility Systems Department was born. And at that transfer, we had 17,000 customers for water and just over 10,000 for sewer. It was the result of that city council's vision and the vision of subsequent city councils that Port St. Lucie's Utility Systems Department is the leader in the industry that it is today. Why are we a leader? For starters, we have a strategic planning period that looks out 50 to 100 years. We have ample treatment plant capacity. Water treatment with 41 million gallons permitted. We have 23 million gallons available to new customers. Sewer, 18 million gallons of treatment capacity with 9 million available. Sophisticated technology that wasn't even dreamt of in '92 is used daily. We have an in-house, nationally certified laboratory. Self-permitting was authorized by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. We're one of 4 utilities in the state. We bill today almost 67,000 accounts monthly, compared to 17,000 18 years ago. We are a leader. And yet, we are faced with ongoing challenges. Water conservation. The efforts will continue to grow locally and globally. Communities are going to be in serious competition for water supply sources. It's an interesting thing about water, it does not adhere to political boundaries. It doesn't know. Every effort has to be made to avoid water wars, such as the ones that the southwest coast of Florida experienced in the 1990s, over in Hillsborough, Pasco, and Pinellas counties, when the wells literally went dry and reservoirs dried up due to overpumping. And there was serious political wars. So how do we meet those challenges? Well, we're not alone. Utilities across the nation face these same challenges. But our #1 job at Port St. Lucie Utility Systems Department is to ensure that we have enough water to meet our customer demands. We learned that lesson all too well back in 1992. Population projections today indicate that we do not have enough water secured to meet our build-out demands. Let's take just a moment and look at projected growth and future water demands. The blue bars represent the population growth, ending up at over 400,000 people in 2060. And at that point in time, the red line is going to show us we're going to need over 70 million gallons of water per day. That's a lot of water. Additional sources from what we have today will be needed. And why do I say that? We are currently only permitted to withdraw 51 million gallons of water. And yet we just saw that our projected build-out demands are going to be 70 million. 6 million of that 70 million will be able to come from the surficial aquifer. 45 million of that can come from the Floridan aquifer. That means almost 19 million gallons, or about 27% of that 70 million, will need to come from other sources. Planning 50 to 100 years from now requires us to address those needs today. Water supply sources, what are they? Well, the 2011 edition of the Upper East Coast Water Supply Plan that's published by the South Florida Water Management District very clearly points out that over the next 20 years, there's going to be a required effort and focus on conservation and non-traditional water supply solutions. The report also says that the shallow or surficial aquifer is a limited resource. Use of the Floridan is expected to increase, also from the report. 80% of our water today comes from the Floridan aquifer. And yet, our current permitted allocation has reached the maximum amount based on drawdown levels. Continued reliance on the Floridan is questionable. That's why we're here tonight. When we started planning back in 2005 to renew our 20-year water use permit, we had counted on that Southwest Floridan well field to take us out to 2030 for that 50 million. We now know that's not going to be enough. There's also going to be a Rangeline Road reverse osmosis treatment plant. Right now we have a facility there for storage. Again, 80% of our water is coming from that Floridan aquifer. We must err on the side of caution. The aquifers simply cannot be overtaxed. The Floridan is a finite source that is not being adequately recharged. And due to South Florida's drawdown restrictions, it's going to be increasingly difficult for us to obtain additional allocations, if not even impossible. What will the city use for its supplemental alternative water sources? Again, to ensure that we have adequate water for our customers. We've done feasibility studies on seawater desalination, surface water, and aquifer storage and recovery well systems. Now, some people ask, why did we look into seawater? It's very simple. Because of Port St. Lucie's proximity to the Atlantic Ocean. In the future, we're going to see advances in desalination technology. Freshwater sources will become more scarce, and at least 50 or more years from now, desal may eventually become a viable option for the Treasure Coast. But today, a surface water system is more cost-effective. When we talk about surface water systems, we have companions to those. One is multiple ASR wells, the other is capturing wasted water. We'll spend a couple of minutes on those. With an aquifer storage and recovery well, surplus water is stored in a well until you need it. And then it is recovered, treated to drinking water standards, and distributed to customers. It would be part of what we call a cyclic water storage and recovery system. Here we see a floodgates on a water control structure, one of several that are here in the city. The average discharge during wet season, I need to point out that wet season is typically about 6 months out of the year. During wet season, the S97 structure, 309 million gallons of water average pass through that structure each day. And that is what we call wasted water. Using that S97 example, again, during wet season, during those 6 months, that 309 million gallons per day, if you add up all those days in that wet season, it's going to be something close to 50 billion gallons of water, wasted water, that spills from the structure, is discharged to the North Fork of the St. Lucie River, and then to the Indian River Lagoon and on out to the ocean. The benefits of capturing wasted water, Mr. Orvek touched on them earlier. It's going to help us meet that 70 million gallon per day need. It's going to reduce the stresses that we put on the surficial and Floridan aquifers. It's going to help us meet growing demands to use alternative sources. And as Mr. Orvek said, it's going to touch and help us with nutrient loading. It will help reduce that. We heard tonight about help St. Lucie, help the St. Lucie River. We're going to reduce freshwater discharges and negative impacts, such as the loading of nitrogen and phosphorus into the river that causes the algae blooms. Support for cyclic water storage and recovery systems can be found in several places, one of which is the Indian River Lagoon South section of the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. Basically says that storing water in reservoirs would be an available as a substitution for well water drawn from the Floridan aquifer. Excuse me. Now, evaluating potential sites has been part of our surface water feasibility study. And because of space and location requirements, all but one of the sites has been west of the city's limits. And then we see that one site here. We looked at gathering or assembling smaller, multiple owner tracts We looked at large parcels, single owner, and consistently one site stood out. It's a collection of 11 parcels with 11 tax ID numbers that's for sale with 3,107 acres. And it has access to the C-23 canal, which makes it perfect for capturing wasted water. The access road abuts Rangeline Road, which abuts the city limits. Again, it has that access parcel, which makes it the ideal location for a cyclic water storage and recovery system. It has a large former coquina mining pit, which would be ideal for a reservoir. There's ample space to construct at least a 1.5 billion gallon aquifer storage and recovery well field. Remember, we'll put the surplus water there. We'll draw it out during dry season when we need it. It's very near that Rangeline storage site that I mentioned to you. It's near large existing water distribution mains on Rangeline, Glades Cutoff, going from Glades down to the Rangeline storage, across Crosstown Parkway, and those that lead and go up through Tradition. There's also a large main that goes down that allows us to serve off of Rangeline Road, the Martin Correctional Institute or facility. And eventually there will be a main across Becker Road. We know that supplemental water will be needed. We've seen we have regulatory support. Recently, we received a letter from South Florida Water Management that in part states and reinforces that the district supports projects implementing water sources and options contained in their water supply plans. The 237-acre lake, again, by utilizing that, it is estimated we'll save $33 million in construction costs in the future. It has that C-23 access. There's room for the future ASR, conservation areas, or a Western Regional Preservation Area. Now, this is a long-term plan, as Mr. Orvac and Mr. Morejo both mentioned, but we will need to get some things started in the next few months. In 2013, well, actually, we may start before then, we'll need to obtain a geological survey to determine areas for potential future or additional coquina mining. We'll need to renegotiate leases for the farmlands and annex the property. 2015, we'll be preparing an ASR report, and South Florida has suggested that we may want to look, instead of the upper Floridan, we may want to look at going into the boulder zone, which is going to be around 3,000 feet deep. By 2020, we'll be pilot testing multiple ASR wells, and we'll start sampling the C-23 water to determine the appropriate treatment process. I work with some guys that are really smart on how to take whatever it is in the water, they take it out, and then they put good stuff back in. So I have no doubt that they'll be able to make this water work. By 2025, we'll be investigating the most economic and efficient way to pump the water out of the canal. We'll start construction of the ASR well field and some additional reservoirs. 2035, we'll start construction of that surface water treatment plant. It's going to take a while to build it, I'll be honest. By 2040, we should have it placed into service. I want to take one last look at the property and the 11 parcel ID numbers that I'm referencing. We see here again that one parcel in the gold is the one that is so important because it has the access parcel. Negotiations to acquire this property have been something else. More than 4 years ago, we began looking at different parcels, and prices ranged anywhere from $17 to $35 million. But approximately a year ago, we began focusing on this particular site and negotiating with Ocean Bank. They were the holder of the mortgage and promissory notes and other loan documents with Bay Hill property. Bay Hill had been in default, though, since at least June of 2010. Unfortunately, we reached a stalemate over the price and the contract language, so negotiations were suspended. And then, as you all will recall, last spring you approved for us to bid on the tax certificates, and that's because we still had that desire to acquire that property. We were the successful bidder on one parcel, the one that has the big lake on it. We made plans to negotiate with the other winning bidders to try to get the remaining 10 parcels, but all of the certificates were redeemed on June 21st. That's not too bad. We made a profit of $4,077. On or about June 13th, the bank filed formal foreclosure against the properties. And so we renewed our negotiations. The foreclosure was a friendly foreclosure, meaning that Bay Hill, the owner, previous owner, agreed not to assert any defenses or counterclaims. The total amount due on the mortgages and notes was $43 million. The clerk of the court held a public auction on September 12th. Prior to that, Ocean Bank had assigned their rights to bid at that auction on an affiliated entity of the bank that they named McCarty Ranch REPH LLC, or McCarty Ranch for short. McCarty Ranch was a successful bidder. We renewed those negotiations, fired them back up again. We obtained a MAI certified appraisal, and it came back at $3,100 an acre. We offered, based on that amount, $9.6 million. The bank turned us down. They had their own appraiser review our appraisal, and that appraiser thought it was worth $3,350 per acre, or $10.4 million. We offered to split the difference, and they accepted. $10,015,850. The legal department, and I have to mention as Lena Goldstein Siegel, and give her credit, she jumped in there and negotiated this contract and the terms of the document that you have in your packet tonight. McCarty Ranch has indicated the bank has indicated they will execute the document upon your approval of the document. And if you do approve it tonight, the closing date will be on or before November 28th. There are many unknowns about the future, but taking steps now can ensure that we have an adequate raw water supply for build-out and for generations to come. It will help sustain our community's natural resources, the environment, the economy, and the quality of life Port St. Lucie's residents have come to enjoy. Therefore, it is respectfully requested that this City Council approve the acquisition of the parcels discussed in the presentation. I need to point out that the money to make the purchase is available from the 2006 utility bond. That money cannot be used to supplement operating costs, for example. It has to be for capital. And with that, I'd like to leave you with a moment of quiet as you observe the closing slide. This is going to be that flock of birds that Mr. Orvek talked about.
Thank you, Donna, for your presentation. Believe me, this is one piece of land I will never forget.